When my husband and I first got married and moved in together, we had a few fights about personal space, about chores, and about decor. Specifically, my husband insisted on keeping this weird painting of a woman. "Who is she?" I asked when I first saw it, leaning against a mountain of moving boxes. "Dunno. I got it at a rummage sale." It was an original painting. Oil, I think, judging by the way the light reflected off the brush strokes. It depicted a young woman standing in a dark room, looking over her shoulder at the viewer. She was actually rather beautiful. Blonde hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall. A white cotton dress. A dainty, heart-shaped face that was somehow haunting rather than cute. She was illuminated brightly, but the room behind her was pitch black. The contrast in her pose reminded me a little bit of Girl with a Pearl Earring, but it didn't feel classy or pensive or beautiful. Instead, it felt creepy, especially because my husband insisted on hanging it above our bed. "I mean, it's a beautiful painting," I said, "but it just doesn't fit with the modern decor." "Neither do your Funko Pops." "Okay, but those are small. This painting is enormous. For Pete's sake, the woman is nearly life-sized. I want to keep her where she is." It seemed like a big deal to him, so I dropped it. But it wasn't easy. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night with the horrible feeling that I was being watched. Then I'd look up and see her haunting gray eyes staring down at me. I didn't get much sleep after that. And there was the one time I swear she moved. "Was her hand always like that?" I asked Eric after getting into bed one night. "Her left hand. The fingers are kind of open, reaching out behind her, like she's waiting for someone to grab her hand. Yeah, she was always like that." I could have sworn she wasn't always like that. Then again, I generally avoided looking at the painting. It was so uncomfortably realistic. When I stared into those gray eyes, I almost felt like I was making eye contact with a person. I lasted 2 weeks. Then I begged Eric to move it. "Can we please move the painting somewhere else? I really hate looking at it when I'm going to sleep. It's the nicest piece of art we have. It belongs above the bed." "What about the sunflower one?" "That's just a print," he complained. "And it's so basic. Come on, I'll move my Funko Pops out if you move the painting out." He heaved a long sigh. "Fine, I'll move her." That was another thing. He often referred to the painting as her. It was weird. So he moved it to the stairs. But honestly, that was worse. Every time I went downstairs, there she was, staring at me from above the landing with those piercing gray eyes. At least when the painting was in the bedroom, I was usually asleep or facing the opposite direction. I hit my breaking point a few days after that. For some reason, I couldn't sleep. After tossing and turning for an hour, I decided to grab a snack downstairs. I got to the top of the stairs, and there she was. I hadn't turned on the main lights. Only the nightlight in the hall bathroom was on. With everything so dark, the background of the painting melted into the shadows. But the woman still stood out, with her pale face and white dress, and my stupid, sleepy brain interpreted it as an actual person standing there. I jumped about a foot in the air, and I would have fallen all the way down the stairs had I not caught the banister at the last second. "Can we please get rid of that painting?" I asked the next morning. Eric turned away from the stove, set the spatula down. "Why?" "Last night, it scared the hell out of me. I nearly fell down the stairs." He stared at me. "She scared you?" he asked slowly. "Well, more like startled me. I thought it was actually a person standing there. He looked at me. Then he broke into laughter. And after a few seconds, I started laughing too. It was pretty stupid now that I thought about it. I know I was sleepy, but still I thought the painting was a person. What did I think we were being burglarized by a young, beautiful blonde woman in a nightdress? For now, I'll move her into my office. Then you don't have to look at her at all. That sounds good. And for a while after that, things were okay. I sort of noticed Eric spending more time in his office than usual, but he also had a big deadline for a brief coming up. And how would that be related to the painting anyway? It's not like he was staring at her for hours on end. Except that's exactly what I caught him doing. One night he didn't come downstairs to eat dinner with me. I called up to him a few times. No reply. So I went upstairs and walked into his office to find him staring at her. He was just sitting there, with his laptop closed, no papers on the desk. Swivel chair turned towards the woman in the painting. "Oh," he said suddenly when I walked in. Then he quickly stood up. "I was just about to come down. Just sent in the brief a few minutes ago. They're really happy with it." He smiled broadly at me, as if nothing were wrong, and then slipped past me. I listened to his footsteps thump down the stairs. Had he actually just finished working? Or was he just sitting in here, staring at her? I ultimately decided not to bring it up. The painting was out of my sight, and that was great. Besides, I had bigger fish to fry, like my own deadline coming up for an article I hadn't even started. But then, on Friday afternoon, I accidentally overheard him on the phone. His voice was muffled through the thick wooden door, but it wasn't hard to hear him. He was shouting, almost. "I'll have it in by tonight." No, I knew it was due on Wednesday. Well, my wife fell down the stairs. I had to take her to the hospital. Those words sent a chill through me. I barged in. "Why are you lying about me falling down the stairs?" His face paled. He ended the call and turned towards me. "I'm so sorry, Tara, but I needed an excuse. I missed the deadline on that brief, and it's my job on the line." "The brief you told me you finished 2 days ago?" He nodded silently. I crossed my arms. "Look, Eric, your work is your business. But we've spent like all of 1 hour together all week. Because you've been locked in here all day, every day. I mean, are you even working? Or are you just sitting in here staring at her?" His dark eyes locked on mine, and then his voice grew soft. "You're jealous of her." "What?" "You shouldn't be, Tara," he said, stepping towards me. "The painting makes her prettier than she was." I froze, stared at him. Then I finally found the words. "Are you saying this is a painting of someone you know?" "No," he said slowly. "Sorry, I misspoke. I meant, whoever this is a portrait of, I'm sure it's a flattering likeness. All portraits are flattering like that." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who is this a painting of, Eric?" "I told you it's not." "Eric." I stepped towards him. My legs felt weak, wobbling underneath me. "Who is this a painting of?" He only shook his head. I couldn't sleep that night. I know. It sounds silly, being so worked up over a painting. But you have to admit it was weird. He was obsessed with this thing, for whatever reason. Why didn't I see the painting when we were dating? Did he hide it away in the basement? That was the one place I'd never been. Had he built a little shrine down there? Painting, candles, the whole 9 yards. The thought of it made me sick. Is it an ex-girlfriend? An ex-wife, even, that he never told me about? Getting a painting commissioned must have cost a fortune, especially a huge, detailed one like this. I mean, as much as I hated that thing, it was clearly done by someone incredibly gifted. The glint in those piercing gray eyes, the small dimple on her right cheek, but clearly he wasn't keeping it to appreciate the artistry. He knew her. And whoever she is, he's obsessed with her. And then I got the craziest idea. I sat up in bed, slowly, quietly, turned to Eric. He was fast asleep. Then I slipped out from underneath the covers, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and tiptoed out of the room. My bare feet padded softly across the hallway as I made my way towards his office. Then I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped inside. The office was cold, much colder than our bedroom. Goosebumps pricked up my bare arms. But I didn't waste any time. I reached over, fumbling across the wall, and hit the switch. The light flicked on. The blonde woman stared down at me from the wall. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I dragged Eric's leather chair across the hardwood and placed it against the wall. Once positioned, I stepped up onto it. We were staring at each other, face to face. I'd never been this close to the painting before, my face inches from hers. This close, I could truly appreciate the detail. Each individual eyelash painstakingly drawn, curving up from its follicle. Thread-like striations of light and dark gray filling her irises. Her skin, so pale and creamy, dotted with the tiniest of pores. But I wasn't here to appreciate the artwork. I lifted my phone and took a photo. Then I brought up a reverse image search. It took a few minutes for me to find the right website and upload the photo. But when the results loaded, I gasped. I expected maybe one result, if I were lucky. Some sort of facial recognition that would match the painted face to a photo. Or maybe the artist's website would come up and mention who the subject was. But instead, dozens of thumbnails filled the page. Of the exact same painting I'd been staring at for weeks. Fingers trembling, I clicked on the first one. It led to a news article. Search continues for missing Franklin art student. My heart dropped. Little black dots danced in my vision. I collapsed into the chair behind me, trembling, and began to read. Anya Kelsing, 23, went missing after a hike with her boyfriend. The two became separated when they came upon a bear. Her backpack was found roughly a mile from where the sighting occurred, but no trace of Anya was found. And the caption under the painting, Kelsing is a third-year student at Franklin College, majoring in fine arts. She recently completed a self-portrait that was exhibited at La Cour. I clicked on the next article, and the next, but they all said the same thing. Hike, bear, disappearance. All of them showed a photo along with her self-portrait. She looked strikingly identical to her painted likeness. None of them mentioned the boyfriend's name, but it had to be Eric. The most recent article from 5 years ago was a video clip of her parents begging for her search to continue. Sadly, judging by the news articles, it never did. I don't know how long I sat there. All I know is that I was suddenly jolted from my thoughts by a loud thump in the hallway. Footsteps coming towards the office. I shot up. He can't find me here. I glanced around the room, looking for someplace, any place that I could hide. But it was probably too late. Surely he'd seen the light on from under the door. I ducked under the desk just as he stepped into the room. Tara? I clapped my hand over my mouth, trying to silence my ragged breathing. He's going to see the chair out of place. He knows I'm here. He knows. Tara? You in here? Why did I hide? I could have just said I came in here because I heard a noise. Needed a pen. Couldn't sleep. Why the fuck did I hide? Now he's going to know that I know. Tara? But maybe it's fine. Maybe the bear got Anya. Maybe Eric had nothing to do with it. Isn't that more likely than Eric being a murderer? There you are. I looked up and screamed. Eric was crouched there in front of the desk, staring at me. I was looking for a pen, I stuttered, lamely. I wanted to write down. I remembered I have to pick up groceries tomorrow and I needed to add something. He tilted his head, a small smile on his lips. I don't think that's the truth, Tara. Make a break for it. I started to lunge out from under the desk. His hand quickly shot out and grabbed my wrist. Hard. You figured out who she is, didn't you? That's the only reason you'd be hiding from me. I trembled in his grasp. What did you do to her? I whispered. He let out a dry laugh. So you think I'm a murderer? How nice. That's the first conclusion you jumped to. No, I don't think you're a murderer. I swallowed. Stupid, stupid, stupid. If he killed her and he knows you know, then you're dead too. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Just, what happened? They didn't find a body. Did the bear get her? He didn't reply. Just stared at me silently with those cold, dark eyes. I was jealous, I continued, desperately. But now I understand. I wish you'd just told me. To lose someone like that. Of course you'd want to keep the painting. It's all you have left of her. You should have just left it alone, he said, his tone oddly emotionless. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I screamed as he lunged for me. It's over. His hands were clenched tight on my wrists as he dragged me out from under the desk. I pulled back, trying to wrench myself free, but it was no use. Thump. A loud crash sounded behind us. Eric whipped around, and for a split second, his grip released. I acted instantly, pulled free from him and ran, pivoting around the desk and racing towards the door. As I glanced back, I saw Eric starting after me, but I also saw what had made the noise. The painting of Anya had fallen from the wall. It lay askew on the floor, her gray eyes staring emptily upwards. I was always a fast runner. Eric was only halfway down the stairs by the time I was at the bottom. Bursting out into the cold air, I began to scream. He grabbed me from behind and tried to pull me back inside, but it was too late. Lights were flicking on. Our neighbor rushed out of his house, dialing 911. It was over. The police arrested Eric for assault. And once I told them my story of his obsession with Anya's painting, they were able to search our house. And hidden in his office drawer, in a small box, was a pair of gold earrings. The same earrings Anya wore on the hike that day. The case is slowly mounting against him. I'm hoping, praying Anya gets justice and that a jury convicts him of her horrible murder. And would he have done the same to me if I hadn't escaped? If Anya's painting hadn't fallen off the wall? There was an explanation, of course. When Eric had moved the painting to his office, he'd mistakenly installed one of the hangers into pure drywall. The weight of the painting had caused it to rip out, and the painting fell. But sometimes I think Anya was watching over me, that her self-portrait carried a piece of her soul, and that night she'd protected me from falling victim to the monster who ended her life. The painting now hangs up in my foyer. Every day I walk by it, and new details pop out at me. The deep, shadowy green of the room behind her, a perfectly painted strand of blonde hair, the glint in her piercing gray eyes, and sometimes I think she's smiling back at me. Did you know that early astronomers thought there were oceans on the moon? I asked, looking up from my book. Mom shifted in her hospital bed, tubes and wires moving with her. Of course, the moon seemed the perfect place for oceans. Too bad we didn't find any water there, I said. Because of those imaginary seas, astronomers called them Maria. Mom smiled. How sweet that they named the moon's oceans after mothers. But they didn't find any oceans, I reminded her. Maybe they just didn't look hard enough, she replied, a faint laugh escaping her lips. No matter how much pain she must be enduring, the fear she must be feeling, Mom's laugh could always light a candle. We were in her hospital room, the room we had been in and out of for a year and a half now. Sometimes with a roommate, sometimes just the two of us. Mom always kept the faith for both of us. The rock I anchored my hope to, the bulwark against the grief I knew was coming. Cancer, such a plain word for something so bloodthirsty and cruel. I've noticed the medical profession does that, uses dry language to cover up the horror, like a sheet draped over a corpse. Malignant, inoperable, metastasized, terminal. But when Mom laughed, when she laughed, we weren't in the hospital anymore. We were home. When Mom laughed, she wasn't sick. She was young again, and I was a child, and the world was filled with light, beckoning to be explored. My mother was a miracle. Cancer had taken so much from her, ravaged her and aged her, but it could never steal her laughter. That was hers forever. "How are you feeling today?" the doctor asked. His visits were becoming less and less frequent. We all sensed this would be Mom's final hospital stay in this room. "Just wonderful, doctor," Mom said, trying to sit up a little higher. "We could still go dancing tonight if you'd like. Though we'd have to get my son's permission. Since his father passed, Brian has been very protective of me." I put on my most serious face. I would need assurances that Dr. Bradshaw's intentions are pure. As the driven snow, he played along. "But I'm afraid I'll have to beg off the dancing tonight, Miss Willen. I'm not as young as I used to be." He emphasized his own age, running a hand through his gray hair. Mom patted her own bald head. "You and me both, handsome," she said. Dr. Bradshaw smiled, but I could tell he was troubled. I saw him glance at the small statue I had placed on Mom's bedside table. That talisman was a miniature gray soapstone oak tree. There were 4 faces carved into the tree, like sentinels against sickness and dark spirits. I noticed the stone figure made the doctor uncomfortable. To be honest, I could barely look at the talisman myself for more than a few seconds. Each face was rendered with a startling liveliness. The face closest to Mom's bed was smiling benevolently, and the face pointing towards the door was baring its teeth, as if to ward off misfortune. The final 2 faces were both weeping. All 4 figures were too human, too crude. There was an uncanniness to the stone tree that unsettled, but I was used to every shade of strange you could imagine. My mother's side of the family was full of stories of inexplicable luck and mysterious tragedy, whispered secrets and unexplained deaths. According to rumor, my grandmother was either a bona fide witch, a madwoman, or both. Possibly both. The tree had come from a box of Grandma's things I found in the attic earlier that month. It could have been a coincidence, but Mom seemed to improve a bit, for a time at least, when I brought the talisman in. I was musing on family history and the odd box while Dr. Bradshaw checked Mom's chart and vitals. "Can I speak to you for a moment?" he asked, pulling me back to reality. Dr. Bradshaw kept his voice light, but I knew he didn't have good news. The hospital hallway smelled strongly of ammonia and birthday cake. Someone must have been having a party. A patient, maybe, or the nurses. It's funny the trivial details you remember while your world is collapsing. "I'm very sorry," Dr. Bradshaw said to me. "The latest test results came back this morning. The cancer is spreading aggressively. We've held it at bay as long as we could, Brian. Your mother is a fighter. But at this point, we just need to Well, try to make her as comfortable as possible. Brian? The dam was cracking, the grief waiting on the other side, heavy and cold like an empty house. I had known for months that this was the most likely outcome, but hearing it said aloud hurt more than I could stand. There's nothing else to try? I asked, fighting down nausea. Anything, trials, experimental, anything? Dr. Bradshaw shook his head. I'm sorry. Sometimes we just plain run out of options. She's fought hard. How long does she have? I asked, looking back towards the hospital room. Mom had drifted off to sleep. Not long. Maybe a few days. Have you considered hospice care? The smell of ammonia and birthday cake. The steady beep from the monitor of Mom's heartbeat. I tried to focus on the world around me. My hope wasn't dead. If medicine couldn't help Mom, maybe something older could. I thought of Grandma's box full of things waiting up in the attic. There was so much in there I hadn't had a chance to go through. Books, candles, secrets, and lost things. Maybe there was a cure, or at least a way to keep fighting. No, I said. If all that's left is to make her comfortable, I want to take her home. The doctor smiled. I understand. We can provide you with some medication, ways to help keep her out of pain. He put a hand on my shoulder. Your mother has been through so much pain, but she'll be at peace soon. You've done everything you could. I know, I lied. Thank you, Doctor. Mom lived in a small house 10 miles outside of town. Not many neighbors except for the forest and a creek that wound through the backyard. It was a warm, blustery afternoon in March when I brought my dying mother home. That night, I began my work. I would make the house a fortress, a labyrinth death could never solve. I would keep Mom safe. I would find a way to keep her alive. The little red book was full of ideas. Running water was an obvious starting point. The creek behind the house was only a small stream, but it could guard the southern side of the property. Salt was the next step, poured along the walkways and windowsills, then formed into an unbroken circle around the entire house. This step had to be repeated daily, the Red Book emphasized, or even multiple times a day. Even a moderate wind could scatter salt sprinkled outside, so it was best to redraw every few hours. Water and salt were common defenses against mankind's oldest enemy and widely known. The book had other, less conventional advice. It took me almost a week to complete carving the symbols and sigils into the walls, floor, even the trees on the property. On the third afternoon, lying in a crawl space, etching strange marks into the underside of the floorboards, it suddenly struck me how irrational I was being. There was no evidence that any of the information in the small red book was anything other than the ravings of an eccentric woman I had only met once or twice as a child. For all I knew, the carvings meant to stave off death could actually be a grocery list in Cantonese. But I was desperate, and every time I saw Mom, she looked thinner, frailer. So I kept carving and praying and building layer upon layer of protection to keep death at bay. My carving took me all over the property. It was a large yard, nearly 3 acres gradually blending into the surrounding woods. I couldn't pinpoint the exact border where the cultivated land and the wild interfaced. They simply flowed into each other. But I did my best to create a clean perimeter with lines scored between the symbols. I had always loved the wildness here. How you could wander a few hundred yards from the house and feel like you had traveled hundreds of years into the past to someplace primordial. It was the perfect playground for a child, whether I was exploring trails, catching tadpoles, or spending an entire summer building yet another treehouse. convinced this would be the final one. It never was. I was never satisfied. The house itself, while small, had always been plenty for Mom and I. My father had passed when I was 7. I didn't remember much about him, only how big he seemed, with a smile as bright as a campfire and hands that I thought could encircle the whole world. Mom often said that I took after Dad. I could see it in old pictures of him. We had the same eyes, green as moss in summer, and the same shock of red hair, the enemy of any comb on the planet. The sicker Mom got, the more frequently she called me by Dad's name. I worried when Mom drifted like that, but a part of me was proud to be mistaken for him. After all the symbols were carved, there were a few final steps in the book to keep death from visiting. There were dozens of talismans and holy objects at the bottom of Grandma's old box in the attic. I sat up there poring over everything Grandma had left behind, cross-referencing the red book, stacking the small charms into neat piles. None of the idols were larger than my thumb. Some were iron, and some were wood, some heavy, some light. All of them were unsettling to look at or touch. The attic was damp, but not enough to explain the deep chill as I sorted through the charms. I wasn't particularly tall, but the attic seemed designed for dolls, the rafters so low I couldn't even crawl. I moved on my knees, the rough floorboards threatening to bite through even my jeans. I could have brought the box downstairs for more room, but that idea filled me with a profound unease. Better to keep the box in the attic, only bringing down the objects as I needed them. Up here at least, Grandma's things, her legacy, was contained. The red book was very specific about the distribution of the holy objects around the house and property. I stepped carefully through Mom's backyard, my boots sinking into mud, a compass in my hand. It had rained nearly every day since I brought Mom home from the hospital. I knew it was almost certainly a coincidence, but couldn't help but wonder if the soft curtains of rain falling on the earth were for her. I placed the charms in a rose compass pattern with the house at the center. The most frightening objects were given places of honor at each of the cardinal directions. Water, salt, sigils, charms, all placed carefully, with intent. Grandma's book promised that these things would provide some level of protection against the inevitability of death. The symbols would confuse it, the charms would distract it, and the water and salt formed barriers to slow it down. But death might still find a crack to slip through. So the red book advised one final trick. There was a single candle at the bottom of the box, a dirty white like yellowed paper. When I lifted the candle out of the box, the stench almost made me retch. Have you ever walked by a portable bathroom on one of the searing hot days of summer? When it's so hot the green plastic has started to warp and bubble. Imagine that smell condensed into a finger of wax. I carried the candle downstairs, set it on the dining room table and lit it. The wick caught instantly, an abnormal maroon flame. There was no heat coming off the candle, and in fact, it seemed to get colder as I moved my hand closer to the flame. As the wax began to melt, the stink was tenfold what it had been in the attic. I swallowed down the bile rising in my throat and quickly left the room, shutting the door behind me as I went. It helped contain the smell to that room, but I couldn't shake the nausea. I went to check on Mom. "Do you remember the day you ran away?" Mom asked, sitting up in bed, her lunch still untouched on the bedside table. I didn't think Mom had any weight left to lose before she was only bone and memory. Her skin was thin as rice paper over a frame that seemed to shrink every day. But her eyes, no matter how frail the rest of her body became, were still two small lanterns against the darkness, green and bright, and full of life. I didn't get far, I replied. And I didn't really run away, just stretched my legs. Mom smiled. You told me you were going to join the circus. You wanted to be an animal trainer, or a strongman, or maybe a fire eater. I think I wanted to be all of those combined. Young me was very big on multitasking. Mom turned her head to look out the window towards the yard. I was so scared when I saw your note, the one that said you were leaving. My hands shook so much I could hardly believe it when I called the police and then Mr. Jonas down the road. It felt like we looked for you half the night, though it couldn't have been more than an hour before we found you out there, lost in the woods, wandering and shivering. You didn't even bring a jacket. I sat down on the bed beside Mom. Yeah, I didn't really plan ahead for my escape to the circus. I remember I lost my nerve for it pretty quickly, but couldn't find my way back. I was glad you found me. I was too, Mom said, and I noticed her wipe away a tear. I really was. That hour you were missing Brian was the most scared I've ever been. Scared we wouldn't find you. Scared you might be hurt or worse. I could hardly breathe for the fear. Then suddenly you were there, and the relief almost made me collapse. I think we stayed up together all night that night looking at the stars. I wanted to make sure you could find the North Star in case you ever got lost again. Mom turned back to me, held out a thin hand, and placed it on mine. There were still tears in her eyes, but she smiled her lighthouse smile. And for a moment, I saw her like she used to be, like the night I ran away and she found me. I squeezed her hand. I was scared too. I was scared I'd be stuck out there. What made you think of that? Oh well, I've been thinking a lot about death lately, and don't. I cut her off. Don't talk like that. You're not going anywhere. Not for a long time. It's okay, Mom said, squeezing my hand. It's okay. I've known real fear and what I'm feeling now. It's not like that. I'm scared, I suppose, but I'm at peace with it. I've had a beautiful life. I'm so glad I got to meet you. Got to be your mom. I'm so glad, too, I whispered, my voice breaking on the last word. But I won't let you go without a fight, I said silently in my head. Something was trying to get to my mother. The strangeness started the day after I lit the candle. At first it was just little things, small wrongs that I chalked up to my imagination. Doors that I knew I had closed at night would be open in the morning. Food started to rot and spoil after only a few days of being in the house. Eventually, food would spoil nearly instantly. Every few hours, the TV in the living room would turn off if it was on, or turn on if it was off. Clocks would stop overnight, always at 3:03 a.m. Shadows began to cling to the corners of rooms independently of any light source. The shadows were very persistent and would stay as long as I stared at them, then vanish when I blinked. I began to hear noises and knocks at all hours, and sometimes when I entered an empty room, I had the sharp, fleeting sense that it had only just been occupied. I stayed out of the dining room except to check twice a day to make sure the candle was still burning. The stench was horrific and would crawl into my throat and nose the moment it had an opening. I always kept that room's door shut and had air fresheners going 24/7 in the surrounding rooms. The strange thing was, the candle never went out, never even seemed to get shorter. I could see the wax melt, but day after day, the candle remained unchanged. The days went by, and the wrongness only deepened. Both Mom and I stopped being able to sleep for the vivid nightmares we couldn't remember upon waking. Only the aftertaste remained, but that was enough to keep my heart racing until morning. I started sleeping in the chair in Mom's room. I did this to comfort her if she woke up at night in a confused state, but also because, if I'm being honest, I was too scared to sleep alone. I felt like a child running to their parents' room, convinced there were monsters under the bed. Only, maybe there really were. By the third week, I couldn't keep doors shut anymore. They would fly open the moment I left the room. The terrible scratching began inside the walls. I told Mom it might be squirrels or mice, but the sound was too persistent, not rodent-like, more like a dog wanting in. I stopped leaving the house for supplies. Instead, I had the little food we ate delivered. I kept the curtains drawn. Every night there was tapping on the window glass. About a month after leaving the hospital, we were living like ghosts. The dining room could no longer contain the candle's stench. The entire house reeked. The small noises gradually shifted to laughter, screams, and whispers from the rooms around us. Something kicked the bathroom door so hard the hinges warped. I covered every mirror in the house. I began to see things in the corners of rooms looking back at me, half-hidden faces, shapes that darted away the moment I turned my head. Mom was drifting further and further away. She had long stretches of confusion, forgetting my name, forgetting where we were. Sometimes she thought I was Dad. Other times, she just stared at the wall for hours, more faded each day like a sun-bleached Polaroid. But she was still alive. We were clearly under siege by something. My world narrowed to a single room, and every trip to the bathroom or opening the door for food felt like crossing no man's land. The noises got worse, the shadows got closer, the sense of movement around the house got sharper. Occasionally I felt hot breath on the back of my neck or passed through a pocket of cold air. I stopped redrawing the lines of salt around the house. I knew deep down that as long as that ugly candle burned, death wouldn't be able to take Mom. On day 33 after leaving the hospital, I woke up from a nightmare to find Mom's bed empty. She hadn't been mobile in a week, so my first feeling was hope that she might have recovered, at least a little. Then I realized the stench we had been living with for weeks was gone. "Mom!" I cried out, running from the room barefoot. I found her in the dining room, the door wide open. She was standing by the table, as frail as a neglected scarecrow, swaying back and forth. Her hand was hovering over the candle. The flame was out. "Why did you do that?" I whispered. "Mom? Are you okay?" I stumbled into the room, the wooden floor icy cold. Mom didn't react to my presence. She just kept swaying from side to side. I realized she was still asleep. "Mom?" I gently shook her shoulder. "Wake up." Her head snapped back, and she nearly fell. I caught her. She was as light as dandelion fluff. "What's happening?" she asked, looking around the dark room. "It's okay," I told her. "You were sleepwalking." "I just had the strangest dream," she mumbled. "There were so many stars and—" She began to shiver uncontrollably. The cold hit me a moment later. I let out a gasp. The house had been chilly before, but the dining room was nearly freezing. My breath bloomed into a thin cloud in front of me. I started to become acutely aware of the complete silence that filled the house. Then I heard the scratching. It came from all the rooms, raking sounds deep in the walls surrounding the dining room. Footsteps followed immediately after, heavy and quick. Somewhere in the house, a pane of glass shattered. "Brian," my mother said, clinging to me. "It's okay," I said. "Everything is going to be—" My voice abandoned me as a massive black shape materialized in the corner of the room. It was the shape of a man, but tall, impossibly tall. And it moved fast. Before I could scream, the darkness had swept over us, enveloping Mom. In the space of a single heartbeat, she was gone. "No," I whispered, clawing at the fading darkness where Mom had stood. "No, no, 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 no." The shadow was disappearing like a pool of water soaking into the floor. There was a texture to it, oily and too slick to hold. I thought of my mother on the night she found me lost in the woods, the night I ran away. The memory flooded with her face, her lighthouse smile. I remembered the relief I felt when she found me, the all-encompassing love. I held on to that feeling, gripped it tight. "You can't have her," I whispered. I closed my fist around the last tendrils of shadow. There was a terrible feeling of resistance, like I had grabbed the tail of a horse and it was trying to throw me off, but I held on. It felt like being torn and dragged. It was a maelstrom with a will of its own, but I held on. It couldn't shake me loose. The temperature was dropping by the second, and I could feel my vision darkening. The last thought that skittered through my head before I passed out was a promise to myself that even if I died, my grip would hold. I wouldn't let go of my mother's life. All sound and light faded, narrowing to a point, and then winking out. I woke up under a sky full of stars. I was lying on soft grass, still in my pajamas and old t-shirt. It was cool wherever I was, but pleasantly so. I stood up. Trees surrounded me, tall and close together, interlaced with shadows. Just to my right, there was a road running straight as an arrow into the distance, blurring into the horizon. But the stars, they were unlike anything I had ever seen before. Brilliant ribbons of aurora undulated overhead in shades of green, cyan, and purple. The stars lit the sky like millions of floating lanterns on a still ocean. The moon shone brightest of all, like a spotlight hanging from the treetops. So close I thought I could reach up and touch its face. "You are persistent," a voice came from the woods behind me. I spun around but couldn't see anyone. Then a streak of black began to materialize against the gloom. The shadow detached itself from the woods and moved towards me. I recognized it instantly as the darkness from the dining room. As it got closer, the thing grew until it touched the sky and filled my vision. A deep horror seeped into me, but I stood my ground. "Give her back," I shouted. The shadow detached from the sky, then stood before me, the shape and size of a tall man. But instead of a void, the thing had cloaked itself in starlight. Miniature constellations drifted across its body, floating slowly like a time-lapse of the night sky. Brightest of all was the North Star, blue and warm. The space between the stars was a complete absence of light. Not darkness, but the total absence of light. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I had ever seen. "What are you?" I whispered. "You know," it replied. "Give her back," I pleaded. "Please, give her back." "I cannot. It was her time. Past her time. You delayed me. Delayed her." I clenched my fist. "She didn't have enough time. I didn't have enough time. This isn't right. It isn't fair." "Of course it isn't fair," the star-filled thing said. "But it is right. Each person has their time, and when it is over, I am there. And there is a road, and we walk it together." "Walk to where?" I asked. "Where are you taking her?" "I don't know. It is not for me to know, only how to get there." "Then I won't let you take her." I stood blocking the road. The world was still and solemn around us. The constellations drifted like clouds, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches. The star-filled thing didn't reply for a moment. "Your mother was very kind and caring. Wherever she goes, she will be at peace," it promised, but the creature held up a hand. Have you ever stopped to think that death is not the enemy? Death simply is. It is the natural companion to life. It holds no prejudice or malice, no schemes or ambition. Your mother has suffered too long, felt too much pain. Instead of letting her rest, you willfully prolonged her life beyond its given arc. You kept her alive, but at the cost of exhausting her, extending her illness, diluting her. Did you keep her alive for her sake or your own? I couldn't answer. Extending life is unnatural, dangerous, it told me. In the weeks you kept me at bay, you attracted the attention of ancient, hungry things, forces that would delight in devouring even the memory of your mother, rending and gnawing until there was nothing left but pain, fear, and a perfect emptiness. I shuddered, remembering the raking sounds, the broken window, and laughter from empty rooms. I'm sorry, I whispered. Can they hurt her here? Is she safe? The stars within the darkness burned brighter for a moment. Your mother will not walk her road alone. None of you walk alone. I am with you to the very end. Can I see her? I asked. Please? Let me say goodbye. It considered for a few seconds. You are persistent. And then, the star-filled thing vanished. I stood alone on the empty road. Brian? I turned and saw my mother behind me on the road. She looked younger, healthier than I had seen her in years. The frailty was gone, and she looked exactly as I remembered her when she found me in the woods all those years ago. Isn't this the loveliest dream? She asked, looking up at the night sky. Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A lovely dream. I love you. I love you so much. She smiled and touched my cheek. I love you too. Don't cry, it's okay. I'll wake up any moment now. I'll see you then. I nodded, wiping away tears. Of course. Yes. I'll see you then. What do you think is waiting at the end of the road? She asked. Do you think I'll have time to find out before I wake up? I looked down the road, scanning the hungry shades in the trees. I don't know. I don't know where it leads, but promise me you'll be careful. My mother smiled wider. Of course I'll be careful. And she won't be going alone, a familiar voice said from behind us. I turned, expecting to see the star-filled thing, but the man standing on the road was completely ordinary. The moonlight was bright enough for me to recognize that he had moss-green eyes and a shock of red hair. What a lovely dream, my mother said. The man walked towards us and took my mother's hand. We looked so similar. I could understand why she confused us when she was sick. Take care of her, I said to the man. Just please take care of her. Make sure she gets where she needs to go. There are things out there that want her, to hurt her. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The man squeezed my shoulder. She'll be safe, protected. If the devil himself is waiting on the road ahead, he'll step aside, or be made to step aside. I believed him. Thoughts raced through my head. There was so much I wanted to say, questions, a million ways to say goodbye. I wanted to hold on to this moment as long as I could, but I realized I had delayed Mom long enough. I love you, I said to them both. Goodbye. I woke up back in the dining room, sitting at the table, the unlit candle in front of me. The house was quiet and still. No more scratching, no sounds or sense of life. Thank you for listening to this chilling tale. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more stories that will send shivers down your spine.